wherever you are in the world. It's so good to be with people involved with CAS. So we go on to the first slide, please. Right, so in terms of CAS is carried out in many different contexts globally, and often people attend webinars such as these with expectations that you can provide answers to problems they have in their own context. Naturally, they often leave disappointed because it's impossible to know their context and to be able to deal with their specific issue. However, I am going to try and answer these questions about CAS. What is CAS? Why is it important? How can you tell if the CAS program is successful for the student? What can the school do to help CAS students? What's the role of the CAS coordinator in supporting the students in developing the program? And very importantly, how do we get students to engage with CAS? In presenting this, I intend to draw, next slide, please. In presenting this, I intend to draw on the experience I have of working with many excellent CAS coordinators in workshops from different parts of the world, and also some of the academic research which has been done on CAS. Hopefully, this presentation will provoke you to think, what's the state of CAS in my school? Are the students getting the most out of CAS? And what can I do to develop CAS further? So, what is CAS? It stands for Creativity, Activity and Service. And as you can see, the three definitions that are provided in the IB CAS guide are here. And so if we look now at the nature of CAS, it's a form of experiential education that has its origins in the academic work of David Kolb and Roger Fry, and also in the writings of Kurt Hahn, the renowned German educationalist. And experiential learning has been described as the process by which the experiencing learner is reflected upon, and from this emerges new insights or learning. And as my personal CAS guru, Ambrose Kelly, once said, experience without reflection is just another experience. So it really stresses the importance of reflection in CAS. You'd like to move on? So this is the experiential model which has been developed for CAS. And you'll see that it really stresses the importance of reflection throughout the process. And in a sense, demonstrating what students have learnt is a way of them showing that they've applied their learnings from reflection. And of course, this particular model provides, if you like, a framework for students actually carrying out CAS. So if you'd like to move on. So why is CAS important? Simon Sinek, in his book, Start With Why, argues that successful organizations always start with a clear reason why they exist rather than how or what they produce. So why does CAS exist and why is it important? And I think the key to this comes from the IB mission statement. And the points we've highlighted there, I think, are really important about CAS. Developing knowledgeable and caring young people who help to create a better and more peaceful world, something which is clearly a need at any time. And also this part, which I think is really important, to become active, compassionate and lifelong learners who understand that other people with their differences can also be right. I think this highlights particularly a concept which permeates the IB programs, and that's of international mindedness. And it's a concept that really embraces understanding of other peoples and also their cultures. In CAS, this comes in a very practical way. Kurt Hahn stressed the need for action. He was a German educator who founded the Outward Bound program and was involved in the early discussions about the IB Diploma. He was a firm believer in students facing challenges and the importance of students developing a sense of empathy and compassion. You can see his quote here. And Alec Peterson, who was the first Director General of the IB, believed also that it was very important for students to act in their beliefs. And I think he was very much influenced by Kurt Hahn. And he said, quote, "If you believe in things, then you must not just think, talk, or write, you must act." And now what I'd like to do is show you a little piece of video from the philosopher Roman Brasnovich. And it's really about the change that we want to see in our students. So if you'd like to show the video now.
The 20th century I see as the age of introspection. That was the era in which the self-help industry and therapy culture told us that the best way to discover who we are and what to do with our lives was to look inside ourselves, to gaze at our own navels. And what we've discovered, of course, is that that has not delivered the good life. So the 21st century needs to be different. Instead of the age of introspection, we need to shift to the age of outrospection. And by outrospection, I mean the idea of discovering who you are and what to do with your life by stepping outside yourself, discovering the lives of other people, other civilizations. And the ultimate art form for the age of outrospection is empathy. I want to talk about what empathy is, why it matters, and ultimately how we can expand our empathic potential. Of course, empathy is more popular today as a concept than at any point in its history. Barack Obama has been talking for several years now about America's empathy deficit. You've got business people talking about empathy marketing. The neuroscientists are measuring the empathy parts of our brains. But I think what we need to do is focus more on two things. First, the way that empathy can be part of the art of living, a philosophy of life. Empathy isn't just something that expands your moral universe. Empathy is something that can make you a more creative thinker, improve your relationships, can create the human bonds that make life worth living. But more than that, empathy is also about social change, radical social change. A lot of people think of empathy as sort of a nice, soft, fluffy concept. I think it's anything but that. I think it's actually quite dangerous because empathy can create revolution. Not one of those old-fashioned revolutions of new states, policies, governments, laws, but something much more fiery and dangerous, which is a revolution of human relationships. Now, if you open a standard psychology textbook, you'll see two definitions of empathy. One of them is this: affective empathy. Empathy as a shared emotional response, a sort of mirrored response. So if you look at the face of this child in anguish and you too feel anguish, that's affective empathy. You're mirroring their emotions. The second kind you'll find when you open your psychology textbook is this: cognitive empathy, which is about perspective taking, about stepping into somebody else's world, almost like an actor looking through the eyes of their character. It's about understanding somebody else's worldview, their beliefs, the fears, the experiences that shape how they look at the world and how they look at themselves. We make assumptions about people. We have prejudices about people which block us from seeing their uniqueness, their individuality. We use labels and highly...
Right. If we can move on to the next slide. Later in the video, Brankovic...
The 20th century I see as the age of introspection.
Later in that video, Brankovic gives an example of George Orwell, who had an extremely privileged background. He went to school at Eton College and then worked as a colonial policeman, who wanted to write about English society, and he decided he needed to understand English culture by living rough on the streets of London to find out what life is like. Now, I'm not suggesting that CAS, in CAS, we should encourage students to live rough, but what I am suggesting is that we do need to encourage students to interact with the community that they're in. And I think that particularly what's happened in the time of COVID is that, in a sense, we've become, again, perhaps a little bit introspective, and we need to move towards introspectiveness. And I think CAS can help the students to do that. And I think one of the important things that CAS can do is also help to develop the qualities of the IB learner profile. If we just have a look at those qualities now, all 10 of them, I believe that all of these qualities are evident when a student is doing good CAS. And it's worth thinking about how well we as CAS coordinators help to mentor and develop these qualities in each of the students. So now we're going to move on a bit and to look at some of the qualities that I think a good CAS student should actually have in doing things. So these are some of the characteristics I think about students who have been successful in CAS. They're genuinely proactive in trying to seek new and challenging experiences. They've developed a number of key skills that will help them later in life. They've demonstrated the ability to manage their time effectively, a big challenge for many kids. They've understood the nature of CAS and the outcomes expected from them. They're good communicators, not only with their peers, but also in the community. They've developed a sense of empathy with others, particularly through service. They act in an ethical manner, and they've developed self-awareness and, importantly, a sense of community awareness. So I think a successful CAS student will have demonstrated they've understood the meaning of the 7 CAS learning outcomes at least once during their CAS program. These learning outcomes were derived from the learner profile. And one of the challenges I see often with students is they state these learning outcomes, they've achieved these without ever explaining them. And I think that's something that's really important, that they have to actually explain what each of these learning outcomes are and how they've achieved them. So if we move on, please. So one of the keys, I think, to having a really successful CAS program is actually having clear personal goals about what they want to achieve. Now, I think it's really important these goals initially are written down so the student can come back and reference them throughout CAS and at the end of CAS and to see what they've actually achieved or have they achieved the goals they set. These goals should reflect their own interests and desires. And I think having this type of student voice can help students have some intrinsic motivation for CAS. And I think that's really important sort of for them to achieve well in it. One of the things that Time did in an article it produced in August of 2021 was a list of things and qualities they thought the people needed for the future. The ability to think through problems, the ability to work collaboratively, distinguish good information from bad, speak more than one language, and being resilient. Alton and Roberts, in both pieces of research about the core, and particularly about CAS, identified the following skills from the program: having a global outlook, understanding the ethical approach to behaviour, thinking skills, both creative and critical. So in other words, the ability to distinguish good information from bad, and to also to be able to think through abstract problems, being reflective, a sense of awareness and identity, and the ability to work collaboratively. So CAS can help to provide many of the skills needed for the future. Right. One of the other things which I think is really important is that students must not only understand the definitions of creativity, activity, and service, but they must also understand the implications of them. So, for example, creativity goes beyond a simple idea. It has to result in a concrete product or performance. And this really gives students plenty of scope to try to learn a new instrument, take up dance, or any of the other creative things they've always wanted to do. And activity really forces students to be active and not just passive. And it's not something generally that can be done just in front of a computer or a laptop. Service, as it's described in CAS, is really a two-way relationship between the server and served, in which an authentic need is being met. And this is a change to our traditional view of service, where we looked at really doing service to someone else and not always being certain about whether the service was needed. So that's, I think, a very important thing. Time management is definitely one of the big challenges that CAS presents to students at the start of their IB diploma. And I think this can be helped very much by getting them set to make agendas with all their commitments, and also being very clear about what the expectations are for students and when the various deadlines are going to be for CAS. And really, it's the responsibility of the IB coordinator with the CAS coordinator to set and include the CAS deadlines with the rest of the deadlines for the diploma. So one of the other things that we're expecting to see is that students really show they've understood the experiential cycle that we showed. And one of the things which I often see as lacking is about how well students have actually carried out investigation and preparation for experiences. And one of the things which I would say is a fantastic resource if you've never used it, and the link is going to appear in chat, is the Youth Mayor's Field Guide. There's a lot of resources in there, and it's really worth exploring. And I think one of the most useful things, particularly for preparing for kids for CAS experiences and projects. It's important the action taken, right, the students have, it's important the action taken is considered and particularly doesn't conflict with the values of the IB learner profile. And the student should reflect on their action critically. Students' opportunities for demonstration of their knowledge can occur in assembly, discussion, CASFER, or in the interviews about what they've learned from their experience. We'd like to move on. All right, one of the other things we've been looking for is really about students being reflexive in their thinking. And so when we look at their reflections, it's impossible to see these particular qualities. There's description of what they've done, personal feelings about the experience, how they've met challenges and overcome them, what they've learnt. And they've developed an attitude of being inquiring about the meaning of their experiences, as well as their personal and interpersonal growth, and questions about how they might react in the future. In terms of the product of CAS reflections, we're looking for quality, not quantity. Yeah. And this is an example of a reflection from a student. You notice the first sentence gives us a description of what was done. It also gives us some idea of one of the learning outcomes about perseverance and commitment to CAS. Then in the second sentence, we have an emotional response to a particular issue. And then the third and fourth sentences, we have some examples of a student developing empathy through service. And the last part of this is a question which a student would have to resolve for the future about service. And really, the reflections provide us with examples of how well students have understood the learning outcomes of CAS. I think the three formal CAS interviews facilitate the development of reflection. The first of these interviews, which is really held early in the student's CAS experience, provides the student with the opportunity to develop clear goals for the CAS program, and as I've suggested, needs to be written down. The second interview, which can occur late in IB1 or at the start of IB2, allows the student to demonstrate how they've met learning outcomes and really to start to discuss some of their personal development. The third interview, which I think is very important, comes at the end of CAS and gives the student the opportunity to reflect on what they've done. And one of the biggest challenges that students face is to understand when their own behaviour is ethical or not. And I've given a very simple example here of an ethical decision a student might actually make about CAS. And this is one which you could easily use many times with kids about it. So, I think the CAS project, which is going to be something which is going to be discussed later on by the CAS panel from Toddle this morning, is a highlight of many CAS students' CAS journey. They have to show how to show initiative and plan a project. It involves communication by learning to collaborate not only with their peers, but also people in the community, and also seeing the benefits of working in a team. It's planned and executed over at least a month, and so it provides many learning opportunities. And the project can be in any one of the three strands. One of the great projects I saw involved two strands: a students' fundraising swim along the full length of Lake Geneva, which is 90 kilometres long. It involved lots of organisation and support for the student, and the student had to work not only with his support team, but also some of the local government organisations to achieve that. So if we move on. This is an example, a bridge of an example of a student's CAS portfolio. You'll see in it that a good student would have a balanced range of activities across C, A, and S. And one of the important things, which I think it also highlights, is the duration of the activities, and also that the student has focused not on all the learning outcomes, which is often a fault of many kids doing this, but just on 2 or 3 of the learning outcomes, which are part of the activities they've done. Okay. So now we're going to watch a little piece of video from a student that was on YouTube about who's reflecting, and I'll make some comments about his reflection at the end of it.
Creativity Activity Service. These are my reflections from 2 years of doing CAS, and here we go. So CAS has pushed me to do more of what I already do and basically reflect, consider and develop more as a person. So strengths and weaknesses. Everyone has their unique skill set and array of talents, and that can be applied better to some areas than others. And for me, one of these areas I felt was long distance running. I was good at long distance running. I thought, okay, you know what, let's push myself more. And so what I chose to do, I signed up for a 5-kilometer run, which was to raise money for children across the ice. So in the few weeks leading up, I ran laps, increasing with each increment and building up to the day when I planned to run my 5K. And I ran it in around 34 minutes, which was impressive considering that it was my first time doing a 5K, I think, and the conditions that they were, it was like scorching hot and it's like 35 degrees, but I managed to do it. So even though this was maybe already a strong point for me, I could run, but I pushed myself even further and I developed even further. And so it shows that for everything, there's always an area where you can grow more.
Okay, so looking at
Creativity.
that particular piece of reflection that we heard from the student there, we had, first of all, a description of what was done, some discussion about his emotions. He clearly identifies a learning outcome. And I think it's an excellent example of a student reflecting at the end of CAS on a piece of video. And one of the things I think is really important is that the students have a variety of different modes of reflection that suit them. Here I've given 3 examples of what could be expected as a piece of prose on the left-hand column, and the center column piece of poetry, and then a word cloud about the same topic. If we can move on. So in looking at the sort of evidence that we might see from students in a portfolio, we might have, for example, some photos of what they've done. On the left-hand side here is a picture of a student CAS fair, which has been held about climate change. And there could be a photo from an individual student about their participation. Obviously, the student's face has to be removed for this to protect their intellectual integrity. Okay, if we move on. So this is a very simple summary of what I think an ideal CAS student should be. I'll have a chance to have a quick look at that. So now let's move on to look at what the school can do to support CAS. So one of the crucial things that CAS needs is time. And it needs timetable time to teach aspects of CAS. For example, how to reflect, the understanding of the learning outcomes, and the CAS stages, among other things. It's important also for CAS coordinators and advisors so they get to know their students. Time is also needed for the coordinator to do administrative work for CAS and to pursue leads for CAS. Also for the coordinator to present to staff members about the program, and for collaborative work between the CAS coordinator and the academic departments and the other parts of the IB Corps. So the school itself needs to really recognise the value of CAS. This might seem obvious, but many schools don't actually appoint a specific CAS coordinator. So it's important to have someone who has that distinct role. And the CAS coordinator then needs to be acknowledged and recognised as a pedagogical leader in the school. The school itself needs to be able to make resources available for CAS. So, for example, transport in some contexts, their sporting and cultural facilities. It also needs to celebrate CAS achievements on websites, or at award ceremonies and in assemblies. It needs to allocate a budget for CAS. And very importantly, the CAS program needs to be represented as a valued opportunity for students. And not forgetting parents, they need to be informed about the CAS program and also about student progress, which should be available on Toddle. And I think one of the things that CAS does is it can change a school's relationship with the community. It's important the school encourages a long-term relationship for CAS with the community. Through service particularly, CAS provides an opportunity to establish relationships with the community and to make it a better place to live. A good example I've seen is the support for slum children in Jakarta by the British International School of Jakarta. Their students designed and also helped to build the very first classrooms they had in design tech, and later on to support the teaching program. Now, most recently, the school, Sekolah Bisa, has moved into new buildings, which the body shop provided the site for and facilities for. And the British International School continues to support this school. And it's an excellent example of developing relationships with the local community. I'm sure there are many others around the CAS world. CAS provides a really important balance to the CAS program. And it's a wonderful opportunity for students to have a truly holistic education during the diploma course. And it should provide a balance to the demands of the academic side of the diploma, and so therefore should be encouraged. And so what role does the CAS coordinator do in actually promoting this? We'll go on to the next slide. So the students really have to be at the center of the CAS coordinator's role, because coordinators should play an important role in inspiring students to make change themselves and others. And to achieve these changes, the coordinators must obviously have a good knowledge of local laws and the culture of the community in which the school is based, because clearly some things which are possible in one context are not in another. And, you know, that climate fair would be a good example. Above all, the coordinator must have a good understanding of each student in their cohort, because that enables the coordinator to know what each student is capable of and to help them understand what represents a genuine challenge for each individual. And I believe they should help students from an introspective mode to an outrospective one, and to become real activists. Move on. The coordinator really needs to encourage students to be self-reflective. One of the things I think that the coordinator needs to do at the start of CAS is to ask some basic questions about themselves. What do I need to do to thrive in the last 2 years at school? What does the school need to do to thrive? What does the community need to do to thrive? How can I help both the school and community to thrive? So those are some things which help the student to be self-reflective, and that's a process we should continue throughout the student's CAS experience.
John, if we could just pause here for one quick moment, because there are a few questions that have been piling in, and I also know that you wanted everybody in the session to also reflect while you were speaking. So would you like me to share the Padlet in the chat so people can start reflecting, because I'm also mindful of the time and we've only got about 20 minutes left.
Okay, that's great.
Super, great. So while I plug the link in the chat, everybody, John, there were a couple of questions that came into the chat, and I thought you might want to address them while people are taking time to reflect on things that you've talked about. The first one has come in from Aditi, who wanted to ask you about how links between CAS and TOK can be established better.
Okay, well, I think one of the things which permeates throughout TOK is the idea of an ethical approach to things. And this is something which students really struggle with. So I was fortunate in teaching both TOK and CAS. And one of the things which I used to do was to actually put some of the ethical issues which came up in CAS as discussion points for TOK. I think there are also some important things which come out from looking at the methods of each of the knowledge areas and how they can be used to actually carry out research and preparation for things in CAS. Now, I think there needs to be within the school much more coordination between the three different parts of the core, and particularly between CAS and the theory of knowledge. And there are issues which will come up in the options for TOK as well. For example, about political issues that might come up, which is in one of the sections, one of the options, and also perhaps with some of the material on Indigenous ways of learning. I also think we could talk about some of the ways of learning and also some of the knowledge questions that come up in CAS and that come up in TOK and see how they relate to CAS. So I hope that answers the question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those interesting inputs. Also have another question about how a CAS coordinator or a CAS advisor for that matter, how can these individuals help their students choose meaningful or CAS experiences that actually create either a good impact on the community or are helpful in the students' growth themselves? So how can we sort of help students better understand what makes for a good CAS experience?
Okay, I think one of the key things here is obviously knowing the student and knowing what their interests and challenges are. And knowing that, then being able to think, present to the student some ideas about some things which they could do. I think one of the important things is also saying to them, well, you could actually look at the operation that the Red Cross or Red Crescent has in your local community. And given these interests, which one of these activities could suit you? This is worth exploring and going and having a look at it. So I think being able to talk with the students, to know some of their strengths and weaknesses, and to be able to talk with them about providing them some opportunities. And I think one of the key things for any CAS coordinator is to actually have a list of contacts of places in the community and within the school that provide opportunities for CAS experiences, so that the students also have an easy place to refer to that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much for that, John. And for everybody in the audience, the Padlet is now active and we can already see lots of very interesting inputs from all those of you who are in attendance today. Just as a brief overview, John would love for all of you to put in some strategies that you've been using to engage students with CAS into this Padlet. So there's lots of interesting ideas that have come up already. I'd like to read a few of these before John gets on with the rest of his presentation. Some CAS coordinators here have talked about how their schools highlight CAS celebrations on weekly school newsletters and emails. Some students are provided with appreciation certificates in school assemblies. There's a website dedicated for CAS that showcases achievements and opportunities for CAS as well. And I think this ties back to what John was saying about, creating a space where the possible avenues for CAS experiences and projects are made available to everybody in one place. So the website would be a great idea for that. I love this idea of having students manage the DP newsletter and put forward their experiences to the entire school community in a creative way. That's such a great way of promoting student agency and giving students a platform to highlight their experiences. Please keep these strategies coming. We'll come back to the Padlet once again before the session closes. I'm going to put the link for the Padlet. Thank you, Carson, for doing that for me. The link to the Padlet is in the chat once again. John, back right over to you to carry on with the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, just one small point. I think that it would be useful were to actually share the Padlet to all the participants this morning, so that after this presentation is over, that they can actually have access to it again. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We will make that, we'll make that Padlet available when we send you a link to the recordings. The Padlet will be made available with that link as well.
Okay, so I think one of the things which I've stressed throughout this is the importance of teaching students about reflection. And one key thing here is we deal with the process of reflection almost on a daily basis with students for CAS. And that is, we answer their questions, we get them to think, we probe them about what they want to do. And that's very much the process of reflection. However, unfortunately, many teachers and a lot of students just see, as soon as they hear the word reflection, a product. How much have I got to write? Can I provide a worksheet for it? And it's important that students realise that there's much more to reflection than just writing or putting up a video, for example, of it. And I think it's very important, as I've tried to do a couple of times in this presentation, to present students with different types of reflection and be very clear about what should be included in the reflection. And I'm often asked, how many reflections should there be in a good CAS portfolio? And I say to them, how long's a piece of string? Because what we're really interested in is quality in reflection and not quantity. I've seen some terrible pieces of reflection where students are being forced to reflect on absolutely everything they've done. And of course, it gets boring for the students. The reflections are meaningless. And I think one very important thing is the coordinator or advisor needs to be very constructive and clear in the feedback they give to students. And that's something which I've seen looking at some CAS records, which isn't done very well, is giving feedback to the students. Okay, if we can move on. And of course, it's vital that the coordinator's a great communicator, particularly with students, but also if they have a team of advisors in a big school. And with the team of advisors, they need to really be clear about the role of the advisor, communicate with the advisors regularly to make sure they're on the same page about CAS. And of course, it's very important to be as supportive as possible to the advisors and to troubleshoot issues that advisors may actually face. And the coordinator really needs to engage staff. And I think this is one of the big challenges with in a school. The staff need to have a clear idea of what CAS is about. Quite often in international schools where there's a high turnover, people come in with some amazing misconceptions about CAS. And one of the things which I've found is really effective is actually getting students to talk about their CAS programs to staff. It gives them a much clearer picture of what's involved. And it gives, I think, CAS a much greater sense of authenticity. I think the coordinator also needs to help staff include CAS in their unit plans and look for all faculty to include CAS in at least one unit per semester. One of the things which I've done and which I know other coordinators have done is to talk about the sustainable development goals and how they could relate to action in their department. And sustainable development goals are here in the next slide. So this is something which is really interesting and stimulates discussion amongst staff and also makes them think about how they can relate this to their own teaching. Right, if you'd like to move on. And I think one of the very important things the coordinator needs to do is to change parents' views. Unfortunately, many parents don't see the value or relevance of CAS. They're focused very much on academic performance of their students. So the coordinator needs to change that perception. And CAS needs to be presented as a great opportunity for personal development instead of a requirement to be met. And again, having students involved in a debrief presentation about CAS carries more weight than often the coordinator does. A last point that's really important. The coordinator also should highlight the value of CAS can have when applying for university courses. And I know from experiences, some colleges in the US have given students scholarships on the basis of their CAS portfolios. So how do we get the students to engage with CAS? Well, I think many students are turned off CAS by a lack of clarity and misconceptions about CAS, particularly the accountancy type of CAS, where students are told they have to complete a certain number of hours to satisfy the CAS requirements, which they don't actually have to do in the guide. And they have to write reflections every time they do something. Both of these things are all about quality and not quantity, about quantity and not quality. What they do need is a good introduction that explains what CAS is, and particularly the expectations of the school. Every school has its own rules and methods of dealing with CAS. A really good handbook or website, Toddle provides that, that inform them about CAS, and definitely timetable time for CAS to discuss some of the issues that come up. We'd like to move on. And I think a student voice and selection of experiences is absolutely vital. And students are most engaged when they've found what their personal passions are, and they're allowed to choose their own activities. One anecdote I'll share with you that was important, a group of students that weren't particularly into CAS wanted to start their own band, and they said this could be for creativity. They had the equipment and the desire. They found an old bomb shelter. Now, these are common in old houses in Switzerland, where they could rehearse. And their enthusiasm led them to other things in CAS, and also to them wanting to perform and performing in public. So we can move on. One thing which I think is really important, if you can manage this, is to have a focused induction into CAS. So having a camp or induction day where the focus is on some sort of activity and reflection from it. At one extreme, I was involved in a camp in Andalusia in Spain. If you just want to move on to the next slide, because there's a lovely picture of this is the part of Andalusia we were in. And the students had the chance to reflect on their hiking and other community service activities they did, and also to discuss some of the issues about reflection. If you want to move on, please. One other thing which I think any school can do is have a CAS fair, where students in IB2 present their experiences to IB1, and they set up a stall where they showcase their CAS experience and projects. And the IB1 students have the chance to ask questions about the CAS program. This really helps the students to contextualize CAS in their own context. And it provides the opportunity for students in IB2 often to recruit students to take over experiences or projects they have. And this can be a great way to start CAS in your school. And CAS alumni can be an inspiration for CAS. So I just mentioned one of these examples I have. A student I knew who overcame a lot of personal challenges in doing solo bike rides for charity, showed great perseverance and initiative, which led him to set up his own company in the US, importing biological wines. And he said that he learnt so much from doing CAS about determination, having a vision, and following a goal through to do things. So if you can move on, please.
John, just a quick reminder for time.
Yep, no problem. So here's some final conclusions about CAS. Be clear about expectations for CAS for students. Inspire students to take on challenges and gain new skills. And don't make CAS too bureaucratic with lots of forms and steps students have to follow. It's important to stress quality in reflections, not quantity. And CAS should have some fun for the student. It should not just be hard work for them. And one thing which I think is really important, which I tried to do when I was a coordinator, is that you need to be a role model for the student by doing some adventurous things yourself, sharing this with the students, and also being there when they actually carry out some of their own experiences. So these were the questions we put up on the Padlet. And now I guess if there are any more questions you'd like to ask at this stage, now will be the time to ask them and to See if I, so.
Can I just request that we go back to the previous slide so people can still see those questions? And we can have people put these either in the Padlet or in the chat while we're taking some questions as well. John, there's one question that's come in from Aditi again, and this one is about how many CAS experience. So how often CAS? Is it important to have CAS in every unit, or is it okay to have one CAS integration in a year? And how frequently should CAS be integrated with DP subjects?
Okay. I think that personally, I would suggest that it's a good idea to look at one meaningful CAS experience or link to CAS for a year for each subject area. I think there's a real risk, as I've seen with some unit plans for both CAS and TOK, that the links are on paper and that's it. Nothing much more happens. So I think it's much better to have something that's meaningful and which we know is actually going to be carried out. And I think the other part of the question again really comes back to having quality of link rather than quantity.
Perfect, that's great. John, how would you advise a CAS advisor or a CAS supervisor to structure their reflection sessions with their students? Because these can often just very vague, with the student walking away, not knowing what to do next. So is there advice you have on that front?
Okay, well, a couple of things I would do. First of all, I would, if I was going to do a session on reflection, I would have involved one of the IB2 students who I knew had reflected well, and I'd get them to come in and talk about some of the qualities that they needed in terms of reflecting. I'd also provide students with some examples of different types of reflection, and one of those, that excellent video which was on YouTube of a student reflecting. Now, I only showed a very small part of that particular video, but it really highlighted many of the qualities that you would want to see in a reflection. And you could also talk about the preparation that was needed, for example, for making this video, for making this presentation, about how you would need to have a script, and that you can't just go and talk and hope that everything's going to be good on just one recording of things. So talk about preparation particularly. The other thing I would do is I would prepare some lessons which are particularly focused on actually explaining the learning outcomes. And I think so that students have a better understanding of what the learning outcomes actually mean.
Great. And John, is there a limit to how many CAS projects students can do?
I think the only limit there is probably in students' time. Quite often you see, when you look at what have been experiences for students, that many of them could actually be classified as CAS projects because they fit all of the criteria, and they've been long-term experiences which the kids have had. I, of course, used to insist as a coordinator that students did at least do one particular CAS project. And what I tried to do was to ensure that the students who actually completed the CAS project by the time they started the second year of CAS, because the second year of the diploma is so demanding.
Right. Got it. And how much time would you, as a coordinator, recommend that schools put aside for CAS in terms of hours? Or should there be, or should schools not put aside time at all? Should this be things that students do on their own and make time for on their own?
In terms of teaching time, I think there needs to be some teaching time for CAS. and also some time where you can meet with the whole cohort. So one way of managing that, which many schools have adopted, is to actually have teaching time allocated in their timetable each week for the core. And within that is time for, obviously for teaching TOK, but also time for the extended essay and also for CAS sessions. And that in timetables has been maybe a couple of hours a week. Depends on the timetable. In terms of the CAS coordinator, in terms of an allocation for them on their teaching load, this is varied enormously, but I would think if you had a full teaching load of, let's say, 26 lessons, that if they were given, say, three to four lessons out of that off just specifically for CAS coordination and not on top of the 26 lessons.
Got it. That's perfect. Thank you so much for answering all of these questions, John. And I know that we've run out of time. So I just want to take this opportunity very quickly to thank you, such a wonderful host for this webinar today. I'd love to also convey my thanks to the audience for the wonderful interaction. The strategies that have been added to that Padlet are absolutely amazing. If you've not gone to the Padlet yet, I'd really advise to spend a couple of minutes after the session is over to go through all of the interesting ideas that CAS coordinators and advisors are actually implementing in their schools and take some inspiration from that. There is a very special student-led panel that we are going to have with us today. This student-led panel is going to feature students from different schools around the world, and we're going to be hearing from them about how they have gone about approaching their CAS experiences, what sort of projects they've been involved in, and how they have reflected on the different learning outcomes. So it would be wonderful if you could join that. There's a link in the chat for that, for going to happen at 11 a.m. GMT. A quick reminder that we're also doing a walkthrough of the CAS module in about 15 minutes from now. So there's a link to that walkthrough as well in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this very special session on CAS with John. Thank you, John, once again for being such a great voice on and sharing some amazing strategies. Coordinators and CAS advisors, as well as educators interested in implementing CAS at their schools can approach what is one of the most important elements of the DP core. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here with us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the other sessions over the weekend. Thank you, John, and thank you, participants.
Thank you.